Welcome to the AgEmerge podcast, brought to you by Ag Solutions Network. Your farming challenges are unique, so your practices should be too. We're here to share emerging ideas, build connections, and provoke conversation.
Get ready to improve your soil, your crops, your livestock, and your family's livelihood. I'm your producer, Kim Chase.
And I'm your host, Monty Bottens. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening. Today, we welcome brothers Luke and Thad Bergschneider from Central Illinois. I have to tell you that I left this recording with Luke and Thad thinking the future of agriculture is in good hands. These bright, articulate, knowledgeable men are critical thinkers who are exploring how they can be an asset to agriculture. They're both driven and humble, which is an exciting combination, and I think will serve them and the future of agriculture very well. Growing up on their family farm, these two have grown not just crops and livestock, but also a passion for the future of agriculture. Luke, a crop scientist and researcher at the University of Illinois, is dedicated to studying soil health, water quality, and nutrient cycles, bridging the gap between science and real-world farming. Meanwhile, Thad has taken a bold step into national leadership, serving as the National FFA President, advocating for ag education and inspiring the next generation of changemakers. From hands-on experience in the field to cutting-edge research and a nationwide advocacy, these brothers are shaping the future of agriculture in their own unique ways. So get ready for an insightful conversation. Let's jump right in.
Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the AgEmerge podcast. Today, I am joined by the Bergschneiders, both Luke and Thad. Welcome, Luke. How are you doing today?
Oh, good afternoon, Monty. Doing good. How are you?
Pretty good. So we've had an opportunity of two brothers that are involved in the family farm here in Central Illinois, West Central Illinois, down by Jacksonville. And Luke, we're going to visit with him first, and we're going to catch Thad here at the end of the podcast. But Luke, tell us your story a little about your family and your family farm, and what's got you to where you are today, and your role with Extension.
Sure. Yeah. So wasn't born on the farm per se. We lived 5-10 miles away till I was 12. So I guess always been involved with agriculture from that. Had rabbits growing up, showed rabbits, and then we moved back to the farm up here. Started showing hogs, 4-H, FFA type stuff. Ended up raising some sows for a couple of years, and then kind of got into the poultry business. I guess my first dive into regenerative ag that I would say, or really anything ag myself, would be I read Joel Salatin's Pastured Poultry Profits. I think I got that when I was in 7th grade. So I read that book, got my first set of laying hens. So I sold eggs throughout high school and kind of had a poultry SAE. And then I always really liked the agronomy, helping on the farm. So I ended up going to Western Illinois University for my undergrad. So I spent 3 years up there, kind of studied with Dr. Groover and Dr. Bernards. That's kind of where I was introduced to you, Monty, for the first time. And then headed over to U of I, did a master's over there with Dr. Andrew Margonaut that I just finished up this summer. And then, after finishing that up, came back here, living back with the parents for a little bit, and then, working for U of I, doing that, and then helping on the family farm. So
you're definitely got your start. Roots are definitely in agriculture.
Yeah. Yep. No, haven't ever been very far from it. We're surrounded by the cattle here. We got a small cattle feedlot, and then Dad and Grandpa, just raise corn and soybeans down here too. So.
Yep. Well, yep. I think Dr. Groover, what he's got going on there in Macomb and north up in Roseville at the organic farm is pretty unique for, not being the primary agricultural research. University of Illinois is kind of more the land grant research ag program. Western does some really interesting things, especially with what he's got going on there at the organic farm. Tell everyone a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So it's he kind of is in between the gap between your small plot research and more field scale research, where they have plots that are mostly like split trials with different practices, but several acre plots generally up there at the farm. So he's looking at anything from doing no-till organic soybeans to corn hybrid trials to a lot of alley cropping, I guess, solar corridor work, um, all kinds of different stuff. Grow oats and peas for some dairy stuff when I worked up there. They used to grow some pumpkins, but it's really neat. They're not funded by university at all, anything like that. It's pretty much operates as its own farm. So he's kind of in between the gap where he's got to make agronomy decisions that make sense with your research to keep your research going for the next year, but then also find things that you can try that local growers and organic growers are interested in. So it's a really neat opportunity. When I was at school there, we got to go up there for a lot of our labs. So we get to go up to the farm, spend 2 hours up there digging and doing all kinds of stuff. It is pretty cool.
It is, and that hands-on approach is great for practical information, and
Yeah.
it definitely fits a need in the Midwest of how to do some organic practices at a field scale. And Joel and I have talked occasionally, and I think I just talked to him a few weeks ago, and I keep threatening about bringing some cattle down on the virtual collars for his field day, and just our schedules haven't worked out,
Yeah.
unfortunately. But I look forward to doing that here one of these years. So,
Yeah.
but no, that's pretty neat. I'm glad you had an opportunity to do that. So, um,
Yeah.
now, so then on at the University of Illinois, you got looking into a little bit of just how we're farming and how that impacts, what are some of these additional impacts that we have as farming? We're told that, the current recommendation out of the university is you put on the last dollar of nitrogen until you don't get one more dollar of bushels of corn back. So typically that means you can spend 10 pounds of nitrogen on your last bushel of corn. And to me, that just is, man, I wouldn't spend 10 pounds of nitrogen on every bushel of corn. Why am I willing to spend 10 pounds of nitrogen on the last bushel of corn?
Sure.
And there really hasn't been research into the other aspects of that, has there? There isn't things out there that say, you know, that's just a pure economic model. It
Yep.
ignores a lot of things, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think I'm not super well versed in the in trials that they've been doing. There's Illinois has a crazy amount of data with those in trials. And they've been doing those in trials that are INREC funded for 20, 30 years, and there's a ton of data behind them. So I think, yeah, just looking forwards, hopefully they're going to be trying to incorporate some stuff where we can look at those like by soil type, because that's the biggest struggle with it is why it's an economic model right now is because there's some sites that you look at the data do not respond to nitrogen in certain years, and then there's sites that massively respond to nitrogen. And I think some of that is kind of flipping it on the head where, you may need more nitrogen help on some of your poorer soils because they don't have the ability to help you out in a good year. Where like a lot of your flat black type soils, you can probably get away with lower than you think as long as you have the weather. But I think the biggest trouble with it is the weather, right? If you could tell me what the weather was going to be, we can find somebody who can tell you how much nitrogen to put on and what your corn's going to yield. It's just playing that weather game, and I think that's where guys get stuck as, maybe we pick the NRTN and then we add 10 or 15 pounds to it just in case. So that's the tricky part with it, I guess.
Well, the reality is we should play with the MRTN model and subtract 10 or 15 pounds just in case. There's a reason for that, right?
Yeah, and I think there's been some stuff that a lot of folks don't even really use the MRTN the way it is. They're generally people overshoot the MRTN, so it's just finding ways. And I think doing it by soil types are really good. Because we kind of like the regional splits now, but even some stuff we farm here at home where Dad will use the Central Illinois MRTN rate for some of the other stuff, but then he'll go use the Southern Illinois calculator for a field that's a mile away, just because that field tends to align with some of those Southern Illinois sites a little bit better. Mm-hmm. So it's just kind of, we have the data there on different soil types, so it's just kind of trying to find ways where we can integrate it a little bit better and make it more useful. So we're not just throwing an extra 20 pounds on just in case.
So you're in the middle of this, and I'll throw some things out there, and you can kind of say, hey, yeah, that's right, or no, that's way off. But obviously, if we exceed the amount of N we need to apply, it affects first off our pocketbook, right?
Yeah,
that's pretty simple. But there's some other things it affects too. Excess nitrogen, increases the risk for groundwater leaching, right? Because the very first amount of nitrogen tends to get absorbed into the soil and is harder to probably convert into nitrates that are easily leachable.
Yep.
The other thing is excess leads to additional runoff because again, we have more as we, the first 100 pounds, let's say, is pretty easy to absorb within the soil system. That next 20 is of higher risk of losing, and then next 20 is maybe 2 times the risk of that one, and it kind of incrementally stages itself. So we have a risk to groundwater and a risk to streams, and that doesn't matter, right? That's just somebody else's problem. Is that how that works? Who cares?
Yeah.
It's loss, right? I like to say our loss is somebody else's pollution, and I think we have to be really cognizant of that. So you've taken a little approach here to just try to find out what are we losing, right?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. Like everything you said there is right from what we know research wise. Especially what we struggle with is a lot of the tiled data research that we have is all replicated small plot type work. Where we pattern tile a field, we split. This lateral is this treatment, and we do that all the way across the field. So we maybe have treatments that are a couple acres, which is great, and we can get a lot of good data on practices that help for that, right? So that's the best spot to test, how much can we get from cover crops? How much of a nitrate reduction can we get from cover crops? And there's a ton of good data that's been going on from a lot of sites out of that. But I think once you take that next step, you get up to the field level, there's just so much that we don't know about what else is going on. That there's just so much variability just within like weather and the sites themselves that can kind of may overshadow some of that management benefit. And that's kind of where some of the work I did with my master's, where we're just starting to try to monitor some fields, like what is an actual realistic outcome for a lot of these fields. Because I mean, no pattern tile is the same and no field's the same. So what we expect to see out of, 20, 30 pounds out of a replicated plot is going to per acre right there. That 20 to 30 pounds per acre on a replicated plot may be completely different for different fields. And it's also flow dependent too. I know everybody, like with the NLRS stuff the last couple of years, we've gone up, but I mean, you look at it, people critique it both ways on, yes, we've gone up on the total amount of nitrate, but our flow weighted is down. So I mean, you have to look at it both ways, but then you get flack from both sides with that, I guess.
So dive into that just a little bit more. You're talking about the total pounds that are leaving has actually decreased, but the concentration's higher.
Other way around.
Other way around. So the
Yeah, the total
concentration is
pounds
lower, but the total amount leaving is, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So we've decreased the concentration, which is good, but we've had more flow. So more flow just equals more pounds.
Right.
It's
Right.
it sounds bad, but I mean that's just what it is. We can't even super low concentration of nitrate. If you have a bunch of water, you can't get away from the math there at some point.
Well, for everyone that doesn't live in Illinois, first off, congratulations. I'm just kidding. But the listeners that don't live in Illinois, reason we talk about this so much is Illinois is number one at a lot of things, and one of the things we're number one at is we win the award for the most amount of nitrogen put into the Gulf of Mexico. So that's why the nutrient loss reduction strategy is so important here in Illinois. Yet it seems like we're not doing a lot to make it happen. I would have to say Indiana and Iowa are champions of cover crops. Indiana is champions in no-till. Illinois, we have bare ground that we love to till. And I just blows my mind how almost when you cross the state line going into Indiana, it's just an arbitrary line. It's not the Mississippi River. And the production practices change almost immediately. And I think the soil didn't change that quick. So we have to do some things different based on what you're seeing, right? So you're diving into this a little bit, realizing that our efforts today have been to create these marshlands, right? To denitrify it through like an artificial wetland or do the bioreactor type thing to get it to react with wood chips and such. And I can say this, you don't have to, but it just seems like that is a total um, let's it's an engineering fix to an ecosystem problem instead of fixing the ecosystem. Is because all these engineered structures, whether it's a wetland, a bioreactor, or, a filter strip, or where we're reallocating the land across or the water across a lot of grass, we still can't handle high flow rates, can we?
Yeah, and I think you have like your edge of field stuff, like you mentioned there, and then we like to support like the multiple phase approach, right? So that's like your 4-hour fertilizer management, some of your infield practices, and then your edge of field practices. I think it's tricky because you do need a combination of things because just sticking a bioreactor on the end of a field, you're going to get times when you get too much water and too much flow, and that bioreactor can only handle so much water. So, so you kind of got to go back to the start. It's like, okay, well, maybe we need to look at our nitrogen rate first, right? So what can we do with our nitrogen rate? And then maybe what can we do with the timing of that nitrogen? And then what can we do with some of our in-field practices? The one that's always fun that I like to kind of point to or bring up within this conversation is I would always love to find like a prairie on some really good soil that we could pattern tile under the prairie and just see what happens there. Because I think we have in our heads that we're going to get to zero at some point. And I think it just, like, we always got to keep that in mind that like zero is not going to happen and it's not attainable. If you put pattern tile underneath a prairie, it's probably going to lose some nitrogen. I mean, just there's so much organic matter and carbon just built up on that soil. They're so fertile that may have issues even in the native prairie scenario. So we kind of got to use that as our baseline in our heads, I think. We don't know what that number is, but start there, and then what can we do in the meantime?
And that's a great point, because even a natural prairie, if we were to tile underneath of it and improve maybe internal drainage characteristics, then we induce more oxygen into that soil, whereby we actually lose carbon out of the soil because it has more, it's in closer proximity to oxygen to react. So, but I think to back up the truck a little bit, yeah, the edge of the field, the engineering practices, yes, they work and they can be effective, but they're big spend. They take acres out of production and those kind of things. Why don't we just not create the problem in the first place? I think which is exciting. And you mentioned the rate, the timing, right, out there. And there was a third one that you said that we really ought to look in on, but rate and timing are the two that come to my mind.
Yeah, I mean, there's within I forget the third one. I guess product and placement, I guess, would be the other two.
Right.
But I mean, the biggest thing I see is a lot of this stuff in my head just makes sense for agronomy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not like it's a thing where we're, I'll say people, where you're telling people to go out and do stuff that doesn't make sense for the crop.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of this stuff just in my head makes sense just inherently, right? I mean, you can go out and you can put, 200 and change pounds of nitrogen down in the fall and come back in the spring, and just you're at the mercy of Mother Nature. Or we can go out and we can maybe place some of that fertilizer, even if you still want to put some out in the fall, maybe place a little bit. I think that people will push back and say yes, but you have to make extra trips in the spring and some of that. But I really just think we need to see a transition of, instead of like we hear a lot about like feeding the soil, you got to feed the soil with your fertility. Maybe we just need to, if we can get that to focus on feeding the crop, and then even if so let's pick on P and K, I guess, here real quick. Build and maintain, or just maintain, has kind of been the standard approach for that, and you're relying on that soil to give all that back to you when you want it. I mean, there's some research coming out of U of I with Dr. Belo's group. It's like, well, that soil for a 300 bushel corn crop, your soil may not be releasing the amount of P and K that you need to make that crop, right? So it's not like you don't need fertilizer thing. It's like, well, you need fertilizer just during these 3 weeks of the year. So how can we support that instead of just throwing that whole rate out on the soil, and you get bound up, it'll get stuck, and may not be there when you need it. Same thing for nitrogen too. Just how can we go for more of a feed the plant approach versus, put it all there and see what happens, I guess.
Right. So that leads to not only economics, but anything that's lost can't produce yield.
Yep.
So we need to really look at those kind of things. And something we've always recommended is first nitrogen in the fields when you plant the crop.
Sure.
And any nitrogen we put in the field, we want to index it to the plant. You know, knifing in the fall and hoping it's going to be there in July is high risk. I mean,
Yeah.
really high risk. And then, broadcasting it onto residues, that's very high risk, and so either the weed and feed approach or the fall ammonia approach, both of those have a lot of inherent risks in them. Um, our risk is we have a calculated application amount,
Yeah.
so but we know what that dollar is going to be, and
Right.
it's not a risk. And actually, we de-risk it because we have a hailstorm or we have a derecho or it's a dry year. We don't have to keep putting on the nitrogen, right?
Sure.
Where if you put on 240 in the fall, it's there. Or if
Yeah.
you had a 2019 and wish you could put beans on it, that's an issue. So
Yeah.
to quantify all this, you suckered me into something, and we,
I
or
did.
or I begged to be a part of it. That's the truth. We, I have a, I have a real curiosity because my dad and we've done a lot of pattern tiling for over 20 years,
Yep.
and we did it to be able to farm no-till and not cause
Sure.
negatives from overwetted soils causing negative impacts. Well, with every good thing, there's always a bad thing as far as maintaining nutrient levels and those kind of things. But historically, we've noticed anywhere we were pattern tiled, we could run 20 to 40 pounds less nitrogen and get equal or better yields. So we had an opportunity where we purchased a small field adjacent to one of our long old time pattern tile projects. And it has the standard clay tiles in the draws, like is very common
Yep.
in Henry County up north. And then also we have an adjacent neighboring field, that same thing, clay tiles up the draws. But he does more of the standard practice locally here of fall applied ammonia.
Sure.
And so I begged, I cajoled, I stole, I did everything possible, but we're going to be looking at that. It's kind of fun. So tell us a little about tile water monitoring and what that turns into.
Yeah. So this is really cool project. So I got started with this project for my master's. So this is kind of my master's project. Basically, there's a group of guys up in Bureau County that had been doing, just a group of farmers doing their own tile water monitoring since 2017. So these guys were going out with buckets, taking a bucket sample, and then timing. So they're getting a flow rate because they're timing how long it takes to fill that bucket up. And they were getting nitrate grab samples, and they were trying to model some of that flow and then kind of do some practice comparisons. So my lab ended up taking that over in 2022 when I kind of started my master's. So we decided to do it a little more scientifically by putting in basically AgEmerge structures, which just tap into your tile. You put a V-notch weir in there, and we put a pressure transducer so we can get flow every 15 minutes instead of just once a week or something. So just a lot more accurate on the flow spot. And then we're going out and taking weekly nitrate grab samples. So basically, we've expanded this network. It's really one of the only ones we've heard of in the country, really, where it's, all these are all commercial operators running their normal practices. They're not changing anything for us. These are, 10 to 80 acre fields, all kinds of different soil types where we're just seeing what's happening with the tile. And then, tracking some of their fertilizer applications just so we have an idea of what's going on to the fields. It's tough to make like direct comparisons with some of that just because everything is so different. But it's going to be a really cool data set just to see with these different practices and these different environments, what's leaving these fields. So that's kind of where I, dragged you in or asked you to be a part of this, Monty, because we were going from basically these 10 fields in Bureau County and kind of wanting to expand to the whole watershed. So we're trying to expand that to the Green River watershed. And kind of just get an idea of what's happened in some of these different places. And then, of course, with that, we have growers with different management practices. Your soils are maybe a little bit different than spots in Bureau County. So it's going to be a really, really cool just tile monitoring network. Illinois Farm Bureaus help support us a lot through the early parts and NREC, just kind of getting some of the equipment and stuff purchased. But it's really just grassroots driven. Originally with farmers just want to say like, hey, we care about what's going on in these fields. We trying to do our best. We don't necessarily know what's happening. So let's see if we can figure out what's happening, because I guess just an example from one of our fields, One of our fields flows all the time. Must be a spring or something in there. It really doesn't stop flowing. And the farmer there is really progressive. I mean, he strip tills his corn into knee-high cereal rye, right? So he's doing top of the tier if we want to talk about nutrient mitigation strategies for cover crops. But because that tile flows all the time, he may still have a higher nitrogen load at the end of the year just because of that tile flow. It has nothing to do with his practices, but if that tile is flowing year round at 3-4 ppm like we talked about earlier, it may not matter what he's doing in field to some degree. I mean, it still matters because it could be worse, but it's like we just need to have an idea of what's going on before the state and EPA and whoever else decides to get too excited about what they want to do when we don't meet our deadlines. Because I don't think the 2025 and the 2035 deadlines, at least for nitrogen, 2025 is not going to happen. And then phosphorus, we probably need 100 years just to actually, just because it's such a legacy issue. But just trying to get ahead of that with some data that, farmers do care about this. And most of these guys are pretty progressive anyways. But yeah, sorry, I kind of got off track there. That's a big over the top summary.
Right. And, what I'm excited to compare is I think it's too easy to draw the conclusion that tile is evil.
Yeah.
Okay. No more tile moratorium. I can just hear that the way that people that don't farm that make laws think. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
what I'm hoping out of our site that we can discover is comparing the system tile, which I do know flows quick and then it's done. Okay. With low rate split nitrogen. Okay.
Mhm.
Just to see, uh, my gut says, or hypothesis, is that the application is the problem, not the tile. The tile gives it the outlet, right?
Yeah.
But the application is what generates it. So we're going to compare then to the overtop of the clay tile that is more the runs all the time tile, except for this year because it's so dry. Um, uh, to see what that is. So we may not get that big flush of water, but we're probably theoretically will get the same total pounds per acre emitted
Yeah.
by that system. And if that's the case, then we know that, okay, pattern tile is maybe not the evil. That's what
Yeah.
I'm hoping to be there. And then we compare it to the conventional fall applied and we see, excessive rates because we've had more opportunities to denitrify and leach and get to the tile before the corn crop can take it up
Mhm.
effectively in June.
Sure.
Um, I'm really looking forward to the results and what comes out of this because I think it gives us an opportunity to say, hey, it's not tile's fault. It's our management. And then once we have that, guess what? We have control of solving the problem. And the problem is save money and apply it when it needs it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's a pretty simple solution versus plugging off every tile or digging it all up or whatever else might come out of that. Um,
Yeah.
it,
I
it,
think there's another cool part of that when we talk about P losses with some of the stream bank erosion. So I guess big picture, Illinois' nutrient loss reduction strategy pretty much has P losses separated into point sources and non-point sources. So for anybody that's not familiar, point sources would be like Chicago Municipal Wastewater Treatment Plant. As a point source, they have to track how much P is leaving that facility all the time, right? So they have regulations and they've reduced some of their P losses. But the way that it was written, it kind of looped anything that is non-point source, they call it ag, which can be is probably a mistake because there's non-ag and non-point, right? We have spots in wooded areas where the whole stream bank just sloughs off and all that dirt soil is just sitting in the water and it's losing phosphorus. So that's really not being counted.
Mhm.
And that number could be up to a third of the ag's 50%. So that's an important one when we tie that into tile is, people blame, the tile's speeding up the flow of the water and it's causing more stream bank erosion. It's like, well, it may or it may not be. It's really situationally dependent. Some colleagues at U of I did a study, kind of a meta-analysis where they looked at all the different stuff. And in some spots, tile did speed up some of that water. In other spots, it slowed it down because if you don't have tile,
It's going to
you
run
have
off.
Yeah, you're losing it off the top. So you're either having the rill and the gully erosion if you don't have the tile,
Taking
versus
more sediment with it across
yeah,
the surface that
yep,
where the phosphorus is applied typically, right?
yep, where we're putting all our fertilizer and stuff.
Right.
Right. Not getting it, you're not filtering it through the soil and then running it out the tile.
Okay.
So there's a whole big that's kind of that doesn't get brought up when you see articles on tile.
Hmm.
That's a really big deal.
Right.
And a lot of that phosphorus could be stuff that everybody's grandpa put in there when he broke out the moldboard plow in 1910. And if we're talking phosphorus leaving Illinois and getting down to the Gulf of Mexico, I mean that's a long time for a soil particle to get all the way down there. But it's a whole, you can cut it a bunch of different ways. It's not just map and dap going on frozen ground or people putting out, four times the rate of map and dap that they should. It's way more complex than that, and that doesn't get brought up.
I think one of the one of the things that Dad noticed, early on is that we soak in water better, because first off, the soil is balanced, right? Tile doesn't extract more water than what is gravitational water in the field. Capillary water there to feed the plant still is there. It's not an issue of drying it out too much. So, but once you have something that can absorb water when you get a rain event versus something that's saturated, yeah, it will soak in versus run off. And like you said, the most nutrient dense portions of our soil is the top paper thin layer.
Yeah.
And that's the layer that goes first when we get sheeting erosion. And,
Mm-hmm.
and like you said, real erosion will get more sedimentation to it. So one of the things I find interesting what you're talking about is mainly the sediment loss associated with phosphorus, but how about the soluble reactive phosphorus? That's a whole nother category that's really kind of come up in the last 5 to 10 years of SRP and
Yeah.
how that is so effective at the algal blooms versus the sediment containing phosphorus. Can
Yeah.
you go through with folks what the difference is between SRP and let's say labile phosphorus or soil bonded phosphorus?
Yeah. I'll try to get this all right. Yeah. So your phosphorus is always generally it's always stuck to the plant somehow, right? Or not stuck to the plant, excuse me, stuck to the soil somehow.
Hmm.
And we'll generally have a little bit of that in soil solution that can be in water pretty easily. So this stuff is readily available and can, like you said, with the algae blooms, can get turned into something really quick, brought up by the plant or flushed out. So it's really something that's got brought up the last couple of years, whether it's coming out through tiles, because that's a potential issue there. It's generally pretty low rates, but our phosphorus rates of loss are a lot less than nitrogen, but it kind of matters more. It's a lower concentration is a bigger deal with phosphorus. So you can either get that from, just water infiltrating through the field, running through if you have a wormhole or something that goes directly to the tile, pulling up some of that phosphorus, or you can also get that with some of that stream bank erosion. You can have sediment that's actually, physically flushed out into the Gulf where it kind of forms some of those wetlands areas and stuff. But also that sediment just sitting there soaking in the water will also, react with the different chemicals and stuff in the water and can put off DRP or SRP in the water like that as well.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm not super up on the technical spots of it with switching over, but that's kind of the general.
Right. And I'll try to share an article with you here
Sure.
later with up in Ohio when they're looking at the Erie watershed. They found that, yeah, the soluble reactive phosphorus was in the tile lines, and that was really driving that. Now, regular phosphorus that was soil bonded didn't really have an effect, but it was all the SRP that was the issue. But
Yeah.
here's the fun part. Did you know that when you spray glyphosate on the soil, they found that it actually increased the soluble reactive phosphorus in the soil?
Really?
It kicked it into soil solution. So they were finding that they didn't get a lot of extra funding after that from certain places, but they were finding that it was that was leading to increases in SRP,
Mm-hmm.
which then would lead to increases into the lake through tile systems and surface drainage. So I'll send that article to you. It's
That'd be interesting.
kind of interesting what Ohio State stumbled across there. So
Yeah, I've heard that. There's some no-till stuff where they've seen that no-till fields that had a lot of worm activity actually increased the flushing because you get a map or a DAP granule or a piece of soil that shoots through a wormhole, direct conduit to the tile and out.
Right.
So it's kind of what do you do there? I mean, we know no-till is really great for a lot of stuff, but
Then the other thing is too is they know just chemically the exudates that come out of a worm, castings,
yep.
are a wonderful filter. So it's like and have all kinds of cation exchange sites. So it's like, how is this happening? I think too often we look at just the physical connection where why are we not capturing that within the worm casting lined hole, or why aren't we filtering that in some way? So
Mhm.
I think the point of this is the more we know, the less we know.
Yeah. And that's not what people like to hear, but I mean that's the truth with all of this. I mean, it's just it's
I do agree with system tile. One of the problems is the stream bank, because you're putting out a large flush of water in a short period of time, and that does create downstream negatives. No doubt about that. That is a real challenge, isn't it? And you're also going to, at this site, I believe, have someone monitoring that stream bank erosion portion.
Yeah, yep. So that's the cool part of this project with tying it all in the watershed scale. So kind of need to do big picture, I guess. We'll do nitrogen and phosphorus budgets. So, everything going in, going out, whether it's ag or field, and kind of comparing that to the final outlet. But then, yeah, we're going to be putting some erosion pins in the sides of the bank to kind of get an idea of what's going on there with soil erosion, and then monitoring some of the streams too. So yeah, Walnut Creek is the main other tributary, or one of the main other tributaries through there. So we're going to do some focus stuff on Walnut Creek, but yeah, it'll be pretty neat. Kind of just trying to get a full picture of what's coming from ag based on all these tiled sites, and then what's coming in from non-ag, whether it's I guess pasture is still technically ag, but not row crop ag. And then stream bank type timber stuff. So,
And one other thing I think that could use some leadership is outlet engineering and design, because outlets today are, yep, there's the open ditch, pop a pipe.
sure.
How does it come out and how far does it drop to the standing water level, and installing maybe riprap there so we're not getting that turbulence in the discharge. That really doesn't happen, does it? I mean, it's just kind of the outlet is all we think about is getting it to a place to outlet. We don't think about how it transitions into that stream.
Sure, yeah, and we haven't done any research on that I know, but it'd be one I'd be curious at even at home here. We got spots where we dump tiles into our creek, and you put it in, and then you see more of that pipe over time, and you get a bigger hole underneath where that pipe is dropping in at. Yeah, so it'd be really interesting to look at just kind of ways you can mitigate some of that once that water's coming out and blowing out underneath your pipe going into your creek or your stream or whatever.
So your farmers over in Bureau County with the project they've been working on since 2017.
Yep.
And you've taken over since 22. What are some things that you just had a meeting with them about a month ago? What are some of the things that they're seeing, and what are changes that they're making as a result of the information? Because if you get the information, you don't make any change, what good is it, right? So
Yeah.
What's happening?
Yeah, so I guess aside from the tile stuff, we're still working through all our tile data. It's a lot of water samples. We finally got our own instrument to run the water samples back at U of I. So that's been a holdup. But my master's stuff, we were looking at in-field. So we did some in-field nitrogen use efficiency using isotopes. I think you had Kelsey on the podcast a while back. So it'd be kind of a similar approach to what Kelsey was doing. And then we were looking at like big scale nutrient budgets. I guess I haven't really specific management practice changes. I probably haven't had anything yet. I don't think. I think that'll come once we get an idea from some of the tile data. One of the neat things seen from the research side would be you kind of hear about like field scale budgets for, if you pulling off this much P or K with the corn crop, you put on this much, are you negative or positive? And kind of using that a way to track whether you're, accumulating or drawing out of the soil there. That's kind of being proposed as a way to regulate farmers in Europe. So kind of doing these NPK budgets where, if you only pull off 150 pounds of nitrogen in your corn, that's all you can put back on. Same for your phosphorus. So we kind of, with my infield stuff, it was really interesting to see how variable those are in field. So your field average is one thing, but within that field, you have drowned out spots. We're putting on 30 pounds of phosphorus annually, and you're not pulling 30 pounds off. So you have these hot spots of accumulation, and you may have other spots where you're drawing down. So we did this for 2 years. So there's not super long term stuff to that, with only one crop phase for each. But that was one of the most interesting things that I saw just from that. It's like you can say this is what's happening on the field scale, but is that really what's happening once you look inside the field? It's way more like this. And then we know that even your nutrient losses are going to be like that. If you have standpipes in that field, well, you're probably not losing as much phosphorus on the top of a hill as you are down next to a dry dam where you have a standpipe. So I think that's something that's coming down the pipeline is maybe how targeted can we be with some of these practices, even within the field, right? I mean, we're not putting in bioreactors, but do we need to put a little grass strip around all of our standpipes with our dry dams? I don't know, but it is kind of an interesting thing that's we're kind of getting there with it with the final finding. I'm supposed to be getting those papers worked up and pushed out before this spring. So that's kind of the big push with getting those done. But yeah, so that's just, I hope that answers your question on that.
Yeah. And it's, and you go back to the nutrient removal aspect of it, it's one thing, the variability of yield within a field,
Yep.
which a yield monitor picks it up, but not as much as what it really is, because
Yep.
a 12-row head averages a lot of corn, and a big combine has 12, 14 seconds of material in it. It averages. So the peaks are greater and the valleys are lower than what our yield monitor might say.
Mm-hmm.
Step two is, you ever look at how flat that bell curve is for all the data of it takes whatever 0.35 pounds of phosphorus per bushel or whatever that number is.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, a few years ago, they said, oh, nope, that's wrong. We're going to shift it, 10% or 15% less.
Yeah.
But if you look at how flat of a distribution curve that is, it tells me that there's corn that's removing much higher rates
Yep.
per bushel, and there's a lot. How do you measure that? Wouldn't that be great to be able to know what is the nutrient removal, per bushel in this part of the field? Because it's a two-part thing. It's yield and nutrient concentration in the kernel, which can multiply to be wildly variable, can it?
Yeah, and that's something I touched on with some of my thesis stuff mentioned in that. It's like you think about it, like it may not matter every year, right? If there's, it's only 2 pounds difference. What's the big deal? Well, 2 pounds over 20 years, if it stays consistent, is a big deal. And you know what I mean? You can get away with, you maybe don't have to put P on for a year and save yourself a couple $100 there. So that's, yeah.
Or maybe we can grow high yielding corn not at the median of the distribution curve. Maybe we can grow it at one standard deviation and not have an effect on yield.
Yeah.
Which is essentially why we shifted the curve, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you're using that number just strictly by definition, 50% of people are above and 50% of people are below. I mean, they pick the higher number and a lot of that stuff just to ensure that people are sufficient, which people can pick at, but from the university standpoint, I think they're just protecting themselves there, which is fine. But yeah, I mean,
it's not fine. give us. I mean, we need to know.
Yeah,
anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, you need the data is the biggest thing, though. It's like, right. Why don't we just? Yeah, you probably should be doing this on your own farm just to see. To be honest, and I think you'd be surprised, for anybody out there, you'd be surprised what the difference is. You do that and you pull up the paper. I mean, they have like the 50th percentile on the paper too, so you can go find that one if you want it. They're just not going to tell you to use the 50th; they'll tell you to use the 75th. But you can find the 50th. But I think you'd be surprised what the difference is, and if you start looking at that over time, it could make a big deal. The other really fun one, if we want to go down another rabbit hole,
why not,
is soybean BNF. So that's the huge one. You hear people talk about, soybeans after corn, or corn after soybeans, sorry. You can get away with 20 to 30 pounds less nitrogen. It's like, well, high yield soybeans are probably net negative on nitrogen. And there's a lot of good data on that there's not excess nitrogen out there from the soybeans after the crop because they're pumping that much more in there. It's a carbon
Lack
and
of a
nitrogen
penalty.
ratio difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're short on carbon, so you're mineralizing some nitrogen. It's not necessarily that it's there free for the taking. You're kind of getting it at the expense of some carbon. Um, and if you talk about those in budgets
Now,
again, they're
you hold it,
trying
Luke. You
to-
said that awful nice. You're doing it at the expense of some carbon. It's like, no, we are burning organic matter out of our soils to grow high yield beans.
yeah, yep,
Okay, sorry to, I just want to make sure we emphasize that. So there's
yeah,
another reason why it's good to have high biomass carbonaceous. Is that a word? That sounds good.
good
High
enough.
carbon containing
Yeah,
cover crop species, ahead of your soybeans to help with that, where you've got some pretty soluble, short shelf life carbon available to put to the plant. So you're not knocking down your soil organic matter growing beans.
yep, yeah. And there's been some of those plots I mentioned earlier over in Champaign-Payette County. Like there's had pretty good research. There's 10 to 15 pounds of nitrogen lost from bean stubble. And this is what you're not going to see this in the newspaper article either because it's all the nitrogen rate on corn. And there's plenty you can pick with some of that too, but there's also an issue where you have bean stubble with nothing on it, especially if that bean stubble gets worked up pretty good, where you're going to lose 10 to 15 pounds of nitrogen on bean stubble that received no nitrogen that year. Yeah, so like there's a management. Still a management problem, but it's not necessarily a strictly fertilizer problem. And I think a lot of this gets labeled as a fertilizer problem. I think it can be, but there's spots where it's really not. It's that cover crop there or something different. I mean, because nobody's putting that much nitrogen on their beans where it's going to matter for the nitrogen loss like that.
Hmm. Lots of things to think about. And this is just corn and soybeans. We got all
Yeah,
kinds of other
I don't
crops
even
to
grow
work with
wheat.
too, right?
Yeah. Oh
So
yeah,
don't worry. I've worked with a lot of crops, and guess what? Probably the number one thing that's overapplied on everything.
nitrogen.
Yep. So if some is good, more is better, right? So,
Yeah.
like I like to say, folks, don't be a moron. Putting more on isn't necessarily always the best solution. Putting on at the right time and in the right place, right form, all those things is definitely right form, timing, placement is key when it comes to that. So I guess we're going to have to report back to everybody here in a few years on sample data and see what it is. See if we prove my hypothesis right that, pattern tile isn't the devil as far as nutrient release. How we're farming is the devil. Um, but we'll just have to see how that comes together.
Yeah. No, it should be a lot of really cool data once we get
Yeah,
it wrapped up. People love to hear that from scientists, right? It's like, oh, we need more time and more data and more funding.
of
But
course.
yeah.
I need a job next year. No.
Yeah.
But anyway, okay. So now you got to give us a little insight on the little brother. We had a chance to talk to him too. He told us a funny story about the two of you, and I haven't shared that with you. So, but anyway, um, you're in a soil health focused household, and um, little brother was pretty involved in FFA, and then he got elected to the state office. Now he's the National FFA President. How do you handle living with a celebrity like that? Is it just being around him at Christmas? Do you have to get the door for him and stuff like that, or is he still manageable?
Well, as older brother, I got to make sure I knock him down a little bit all the
Okay,
time.
that's good. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's weird because he's also a model. He's not just like the celebrity. Like he's also a model. Like they come out with their catalog, and he's modeling all the apparel for everybody. So he's
Oh
he's kind
boy.
of pulling double duty.
Well,
But
he probably gets double the pay then, right?
I hope so. I don't know.
So no, we had a chance to catch up with him in the airport this morning when he was on his way to New Orleans, then off to Japan. FFA is a wonderful experience for them. I'm glad he gets a chance to be a part of the national leadership. So, but behind the scenes, what do you see happening there, and how's that opportunity work for him and for others that in FFA?
Yeah, no, it's gonna be such a cool experience for him. He really enjoyed his time as state president. Getting to spend a lot of time with all the different chapters and stuff. But he's really like an ag and a business nerd. He really likes the ag side of business. Like I'm probably more the agronomy nerd, and he really enjoys the business side of things. So I think that's really what he's gonna excel at. It'd be kind of working with some of those corporate partners, I think. He just loves talking to people. He's way more of a people person than I am, so it's gonna be great for him for that. He can remember name and a face and all that kind of stuff. This is gonna be really, really cool.
Well,
He's really
if he
thoughtful.
finds a corporate job at Nutrien or Yara, you two are going to have a hard Christmas dinners talking nitrogen rates.
I'll probably keep him out of that department, I think.
Okay. Hey, he was telling me a little story about fixing up a hog shade. We gotta get your opinion on this. He was saying that, oh, the brother just jumps right in and he fixes it and he does it and it didn't work and he jumps in and does it a second way. He said, well, I'm standing back thinking of how to strategy and what would be the best way to do this. And my brother's just off getting it done. Now, we know the real truth, right? He just stood around waiting for you to get it done. Is that the real story here, Luke?
Yeah, he was supervising.
Oh, supervising. Okay, so he's like DOT.
Yeah, he was holding my ladder.
Oh, okay, that was handy. Yeah.
No, what do they say? If you can survive loading hogs or working hogs with part of your family, you guys are fine for a while.
What is
Yeah,
worse, you think, hogs or cattle loading?
I think
Good
hogs are.
question. Hogs, because they got an attitude, don't they? You're not just fighting your family members, you're fighting the hog if you don't do it right.
Oh yeah, they got such a. You can kind of. I mean, a cow's not going to move unless you want it to, but like, I feel like hogs are just more stubborn and they got a lower center of gravity.
Yeah, they take you out really well.
Yeah, they get a lot less leverage on one of them. Um,
Yeah.
but no, I have really enjoyed working with him, all that kind of stuff. So did a lot of my turkey chores and I raised turkeys for a while.
Okay.
So I did some direct market turkeys, direct to consumer turkeys for a little bit, and then with our 4-H hogs. I'm just glad they put up with me. I'm kind of particular with some of that kind of stuff. I've gotten better, but yeah, it's like I'm kind of the way like I don't do a good job of like explaining exactly what I want you to do. I expect you to like know where you need to be, and that was probably not the best. When I didn't explain it well in the first case, that probably didn't work out great for them sometimes, but they put up with me.
There you go. Well,
Yeah.
Luke, anything else we should have visited about while we were together here today?
Um, no, I don't think so off the top of my head. That I'm glad we were able to connect, and really enjoyed coming up there to your guys' place last summer and seeing everything you're doing. Really, coming home here, Dad and Grandpa farm full time, so always looking for different ways that I can kind of, whether it's direct market or doing some other different stuffs with corn and soybean crops, non-GMO specialty stuff. Just finding ways you can make a couple extra bucks and make it work on the farm. So,
Yeah.
really enjoyed getting to know you from that, I guess.
Well, good, good. And stay tuned. We're thinking about a summer field day, so I don't want to announce that to everybody just yet. So we'll get that all dialed in, but maybe you can be a part of that too, and we talk about the project. So
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
yeah, looking forward to that. So appreciate you being here, Luke. Now everyone else, stay tuned. We're gonna dial in here with Thad and hear what he has to say about his involvement there at the National FFA organization and what all they're up to. But exciting family here, the Bergschneiders. They're making a real difference. They're making a difference in how we farm and how we lead the next generation. And we thank you both, Luke and Thad, for being a part of this.
Yeah, no, thank you guys. We appreciate it.
The AgEmerge podcast is brought to you by Ag Solutions Network. The ASN team is hands-on, digging in and invested in regenerative agriculture. Along with the proper plant nutrition and biologicals to boost your soil microbiome, we provide the ideas and implementation guidance to support you on your soil health journey. So stop farming the same way and contact Ag Solutions Network today at asn.farm. Let's jump into this conversation as Monty catches up with Thad while he's at the airport, getting ready to fly to his next destination.
Tell me about your platform. What's your main goals through your tenure?
So this year, FFA it's the first year with 1 million members. So right now we're at 1,027,000 members, and then with affiliation, where all members in ag classes and ag ed classes around states get the opportunity to become FFA members, so they don't have to worry about paying membership dues. So I mean, this year more than anything, we're seeing membership skyrocket. And I mean, it's been a slow climb, right? I mean, it just happens because local chapters continue to be great and students want to join FFA, but we're trying to keep pace with that membership and make sure that all of the opportunities continue. And as middle school opportunities open up, what are we doing to make sure middle schoolers are keeping engaged? I mean, all those sort of questions. And then, I mean, what I'm passionate about particularly is, you see a lot of things, I mean, in all places, right? You get caught in tradition, and there's FFA contests where it's like, are we really meeting industry needs right now? And I love hearing conversations with industry members, with stakeholders about, like, what do you actually need, and how can we continue to bring that to FFA chapters so we are actually, raising up the next generation of leaders. So that's really what I'm most excited about, I'd say, is hearing what we really need from stakeholders, from industry members, and trying to figure out how we continue to bring that to local chapters even more. So fun conversations. And I just get to learn a lot this year more than anything.
So, what have been some of the insights that you've picked up on that you didn't know before?
Yeah, well, first off, I chair the national board of directors, right? So like we come in, we've got the budget, all those things, and then as soon as I stepped in, I was like, "Whoa, this is a bigger operation than I thought it was." Once I saw the underlying budget lines, it was like, wow, like the amount of money we're pouring into students, the amount of money we're pouring into scholarships, the amount of money it takes to run these opportunities, like there's a lot more under the tip of the iceberg, I guess would be my first realization. Like the amount of people and the amount of logistics it takes to execute on these things are just things I never really thought about. Um, and then I'd say I'm just slowly learning this a little bit more as I've gotten to travel to Mississippi and Georgia, but just being reminded of, like the amazing people on the local level and in these local chapters and the stories that I get to hear. Like yesterday, I was in, oh, what chapter was that? Well, not that it matters too much. We're in rural Mississippi. And, I was just talking to a student named John, and we were talking about getting his license, getting his car, and he talked about how he started this record book doing pressure washing because he's really just trying to save up money. But because of that and because of ag class, like he's started financial health goals for himself and how he's going to carry himself through college. And it was just like, a reminder of how good FFA is for young people. I mean, starting his own business, earning his way to get a truck, to get to college, and that's what we do.
Hmm. Cool. So what are some trends you see coming with young students? So I mean, yes, you're going back, to junior high, but let's on the high school students interested in agriculture. Um, what are some trends that you are standing out to you that maybe you did know or didn't know before your national role?
Yeah, I'd say two trends, kind of one ag and one not. The non-ag trend, I mean, we make jokes about like our attention spans are worse than they ever were because of Facebook Reels and TikTok, and I feel like that's a thing. We laugh at like, oh, we're just, it's the old people crying about we're not reading newspapers anymore, or at least like that's what I hear students joking about. But truly, when you walk into classrooms now, I think it's different than it was 5 years ago because of what COVID did to development, what COVID did to students like social interaction. So I think there is so much room and so much need to fill the gaps in like how to work in teams, how students interact with each other, how students interact with the world, how students engage with material because of attention spans declining. Like I think those are problems I used to laugh at, but now I'm like, wow, like we have to kind of go back to not square one, but we have to look at how we're learning, how students are learning, and do our best to fill those gaps. And then an ag trend, I'd say we have students in FFA who are doing great things when it comes to technology and agriculture, but I think that's one of our gaps where we have to bring students in who are like highly technically skilled in areas that have not typically been FFA or agriculture. Students who are interested in, Python and coding and all these sort of areas that usually we don't have contests for. If we're going to be successful in the next 10, 20 years, I think we have to have a much better system for either having contests or having groups where like students in technology are focused on agriculture, or we're going to miss out on that pipeline. So those would be my two things.
I think you nailed one right there with well, both of them, obviously. I remember one of the benefits of FFA is we had a very active chapter, and that's one of the things I'm sure you struggle with on a national basis is activity level of chapters from school
Yeah.
to school can vary, and that hinges on, the teacher and also on the administration support of the teacher's role there. But
100%.
we were at a contest once a week minimum, if not
Yeah.
twice a week. Something. We did everything, and
Yep.
social interaction and the leadership opportunities are phenomenal. And FFA is primed to kind of restart that in these people that
Yeah.
some youngsters, and they're probably hitting it right now in high school. During a key development stage, they were on lockdown, right? So that's a
Yep.
great opportunity. But I like what you say. There's a lot of technology people on this planet that can do the coding and do the things. But because of this podcast and other activities I do, I get a lot of phone calls from startups, and they're like, "Tell me about farming."
Yeah.
you know, what do you plant? How do you grow that? I mean, they just have no clue about
Yep.
agriculture at all. And boy, if we could get people who are, either from the farm or from, communities or people that are actively engaged in agriculture education, the mission of the FFA, if those people could be there to design, develop these products. Oh my goodness, we could
Yeah.
advance so much quicker because, you know, um, let's say the non-farm propeller heads. That's my term, not yours, obviously. They just don't have a clue on how those things work, and
Yeah.
I think, boy, anything you could do on that, Thad, to promote, engagement of those kids in ag technologies, because AI is just primed for making agronomic recommendations because it can
100%.
it can take all of the information from, soil tests, sensories, imagery, all that, and assimilate because that's really complicated and it requires it requires some gray hair typically on the part of the agronomist to make
Yeah.
good sound recommendations that are unbiased, that aren't, gee, if I sold a little more of this chemical, we get the hunting trip kind of thing. So
Yeah.
we could
Yeah.
get better decisions for farmers, right? And who's out there with that ag background to build that model, right?
Yeah.
Boy,
Uh,
that's just one example of many, right?
yeah. And a mentor of mine, Vance Crow, put it in an interesting way. When I was kind of training for interviews, he said, the most important thing you can be for people in this world is the intersection of two good Venn diagrams. And I think with specialization in this world, like we have a lot of people who are great at technology, who know agronomy and know ag, but with specialization, we end up missing the intersections of Venn diagrams. And there's such a need for my dad does like part-time CFO work for farms. So like the intersection of finance and a farmer who actually knows ag and what it's like to have your own balance sheet on a farm. And students who know what it's like to be on a farm, but also have messed with AI a little bit and can start trying to figure out how that could help us. So yeah, I don't know how I'm going to be able to continue to encourage that. Um, but those are the ideas I like talking about. Like Farm Beats with Microsoft, how we can use their platform and use their support to get students messing around with technology and trying things out. Those are good conversations.
Yeah, excellent. So, looking back a year from now, what are you going to say about the impact that you made?
Mm. Yeah, I got that question as soon as I stepped off stage, right? Like an interviewer came up to me and they're like, "So, what do you think about your legacy so far?" And I was like, I'm not, I just kind of laughed. I was like, I'm 19 and you're asking me, what my legacy is going to be like in FFA. And I thought about it for a second. I was like, okay, I can see how that's a valid question. And we almost should be thinking about that, right? Like everything we leave today is something we leave behind. So what are you leaving behind? So I'd say more than anything, I hope my legacy is just like a network of people and not just a network, like a family of people that I can look back on and just say like, yep, I met this student in Mississippi and I met this ag teacher in California and I met this advisor in Idaho. I want to be able to look back and see these groups of people who I connected with who just have the best interests of this organization, ag in mind. And then I also hope I can look back and say I had the foresight to do what mattered on the National FFA board and things like we're talking about right now. Like, I don't want to look back at FFA in 20 years when I'm 40 and say, like, yeah, we missed the mark on that. And I really should have been the catalyst for some of those things we should have started doing. Right. And I think technology might be that thing for me. So kind of looking that in the face and saying, I don't know what the first steps are, but if I can just start those conversations, I might be able to look back and go like, hey, at least we started putting the foot in the right direction. So that might be somewhat of a legacy, but I
Very
don't think
good.
too much about that.
Well, I know another aspect of your operation is you guys are very interested in soil health
Hmm.
and what that means. How does that message get communicated to, like you said earlier, we have a generation that if you have over 3 second TikTok, it's boring. Where soil decisions we make today in the soil, we really don't notice, but boy, after you do that for 40 years, it's like, ooh, we don't have anything left. We're losing arable land on a regular basis. How do we
Yeah.
help younger generation to build that long-term mindset, let alone the industry? The industry
Yeah.
functions by quarters and years or months, not by decades and generations like a farmer does.
Yeah.
How do we help people understand that so that they place a priority on that longevity of it versus just saving a couple pennies at the grocery store?
Yeah. First off, I think it's funny, right? Because that is the natural human problem. Like we struggle with anything that doesn't hurt now, but it's going to hurt in a long time. Like
Yep.
that's that
Yep.
is the human instinct,
Hmm.
right? But I think we have to come up with the right incentives. I'm a big like Charlie Munger fan, so reading through like the right incentives in any system get the job done. So what are our incentives in the present to encourage soil health? And I mean I think that's the big that's to
But
me
what
the
are
big
the
question.
disincentives, right? Are our
Yep,
incentives
exactly.
not aligning with what we really
Yep,
need? And how do you bring that alignment about?
yep. Because as much as we talk about here is the long term impact of what happens if we don't do it, and here's what's going to happen to our world if we don't. I mean, if it doesn't impact this year or next, it's nothing's happening, right? Like we have to come up with the right incentive system. So again, you have these conversations more than I do, and I think you have a much better picture of what that looks like. But I'd say creating the right incentive system so soil health aligns with your balance sheet or what you actually want to do on the farm, and what the consumer or the customer wants. That's the right push.
Very good. So I hear we're talking to a poultry producer here with
Yep.
have your own turkey operation. That's great. What are other farming goals in the future for you? I know all farming is on hold now because you have to. Do they even allow you 2 hours of sleep as a national officer, or is that completely out?
From time to time they let us get some shut eye, but
Because we caught you in an airport right here on with New Orleans and Japan on your itinerary here in the upcoming days. Um, when all that madness subsides, where do you see your role in agriculture?
yeah. So I'd say broadly as a career, I love business. Like I love my business podcast. I listen to Acquired all the time. I love business strategy and I love agriculture. And I don't know where those two things meet exactly yet, but I am excited for any conversations that I get to have. And the other asterisk I would put on that is this might be a young person speaking here, Monty, so you can call me out and laugh at me. But I just really want to do something that matters, and not just matters in that like you get a good check or you have the position where people are like, oh yeah, like you got high in this company. But I think we can both tell when there's something that just is working in the current system and you're rewarded because that's the way things have always been done, and when you're rewarded because you actually have a purpose and a vision for what's ahead in the future and you're doing what's right for the world and its people. And so
I was going to say, just back up a step. It don't have to be a CEO to do things that matter.
yep,
Think
exactly.
think even in your 300 turkeys, right? You did.
Yep.
Okay, think on that. How much of a difference that really made to the people that ate them or got them,
Yeah,
right? I
exactly.
mean, you weren't just randomly. I mean, there were people reaching out to you. You developed family connections, and they were doing it because
Hmm.
they trusted food that you were raising, and it made a big difference for them in a holiday family event, right? Even
Yep.
something as simple as that makes a difference.
Yeah, and that's a good way to frame it. So I'd say if I was going to make that a little bit more concise, I just want to do something that carries an impact for the people I meet. And when I go home and I get my shut eye, whether it's 2 hours or not, like I know I'm giving something to the world, right? Like I know I'm giving something to the world, I'm adding value, and I'm not just taking from it and reaping the benefits off of the system, right? I always want to be contributing. So I'd say that's my career goals. And then what farming looks like for me, I'm interested in a lot of things now that I have gotten out of, my corn and soybean and cattle background. I love coffee. I'm a black coffee drinker in the morning. And all of a sudden I'm thinking, like what does a coffee plantation actually look like? What does a cocoa plantation actually look like? So I don't think those are farming goals for me, but I'm really excited to learn more. What do these specialty crops look like? How do you get engaged with that? How do you get started and maybe helping these processes, and what is this system like? Because I'm used to the Midwest, but I mean, long-term goal, I mean, I would love to start maybe a beef operation with Luke, just farm to table, and we can see what happens and what the timeline is on that. But I think that's a long-term goal.
I think that's a great eye-opening opportunity you have, because I went to California and lived there for 12 years and was engaged in the agriculture there, and just mind blowing.
Yep.
In Fresno County, there's 300 crops produced,
Yeah.
and then returning
Yep.
back home, corn and soybeans. It's like, that's kind of boring, folks. So uh,
Yep.
it's not that it's not necessary, needed, or whatever. It's just that, yeah, we can do more than, we can be more creative. And you look at one time, Illinois was a leading dairy state, leading,
Yep.
it had tomato production, lots of different things that just don't exist anymore. So, but no, it's fascinating. And what a great opportunity that you get to have. Megan on our team, she was a California state officer, and
Okay.
she talks about it and the impact that it's made on her life and career. So I'm certain that you'll go and make a huge impact. So I'm excited for you.
Yeah. And I just got to be willing to keep on learning. There's so many times when I'm like, I don't know anything. I mean, I feel that very often. I mean, I probably feel that more than I feel like I actually know anything. It's like, man, I don't know squat. And so this year is just being willing to say that and being willing to learn more anyway. So definitely learning opportunities.
Well, excellent. Well, Thad, one thing we were planning on having you and Luke together on the podcast. We just had one
Yep.
thing after another happen here. But since, he's not here to defend himself, this is your opportunity as a younger brother. Anything we need to know about Luke that you can poke a little bit at him?
Uh, yeah. So I'd say if you want to know the difference between me and Luke's thinking and kind of where our paths have taken us in life, I'd tell you about the time we put up a shade cloth for the hogs. All right. And we went out and we're holding this shade cloth, and we've got kind of a frame we're going to put it on. We got some baling wire. And I'm looking at Luke, and he just goes and throws it up and starts wiring things. And I'm just standing here and I'm looking at it and I'm studying it and I'm walking around. I'm like, where is this going to go? And Luke's out here and he's already tried two things that didn't work. And I'm like, Luke, I think we can do it this way. And he's like, Thad, will you take the time to think about how things should be done? I can do them twice and at least get her done before you even decide what the plan of action is. And more than anything, that is the difference between me and Luke. I am, I like to think about things, usually too much. And Luke, since I think he popped out of the womb, has always been a doer. And, he's going to go wire the shade cloth twice and he's going to see if it works. And when he talks about soil health and the research he's doing at the U of I, that's not just something that he researches or he thinks about. That's something that he's coming home and saying, Dad, hey, even though we've never done it, I think we needed to try cover crops. And then all of a sudden we're the only farm in a 5 mile radius, I feel like, more than a 5 mile radius, but I don't want to take stabs at any farmers around us who have green fields after harvest, right? And so Luke's a doer, and he's going out here and he is always putting things into action and trying things out because that's who he is. So that's Luke Bergshneider for you.
If God made us all the same, how boring would it be? And then the other thing is that we need those checks and balances, right? We need
100%.
we need doers, we need thinkers, strategy, and all those things. So again, thanks for joining us here for a brief bit today. Reserve the opportunity, Thad, to talk more maybe at the completion of your tenure. I think it'd be fun to kind of follow up on that and just really look for in your time that you've got, look for those opportunities where the consumer, what they want, what they value, how do we address their concerns and how do we meet their needs? And how do we do that as an industry? Because it takes us farmers not just to grow something we want, hope somebody does something with it, but how do we get that whole chain from field all the way to their plate aligned with what they want and what's best for them? So
Yep.
I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity there.
Yep. And whatever ideas you have, Monty, I mean, you have a pulse on what's going on within sustainable and regenerative ag more than anybody. So the ideas you have, things you hear that you want to shoot my way that I need to keep in mind as I represent ag and FFA members this year, I want to hear them. So I appreciate it.
All right. Sounds good, Thad. Thanks for joining us today, and enjoy your travels, and we'll see you when you get back.
Will do. Take care, Monty, and thank you for working with me today. I'm sorry I had to, run through TSA and make things kind of hectic, but appreciate it and hope you have a good time talking to Luke.
We're glad we could join you. Thank you.
What a great conversation. We hope you enjoyed hearing from Luke and Thad as they shared their journey from growing up on a farm to making an impact in research and leadership. Whether it's advancing soil science or inspiring the next generation of agricultural leaders, these brothers are proof that the future in farming is in good hands. And be sure to subscribe to the AgEmerge podcast for more inspiring stories like Luke and Thad's. And if you'd like to learn more about what we're doing to help growers to develop their own story of effective soil health practices, check out our website at asn.farm. And there you can click on links to follow us on Facebook, X, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. There's a lot of great things happening and always something to learn. Thanks for listening.